Well, you're in for a treat this particular weekend because I have two podcasts. I did a podcast and I felt it was so big and so personal that I'd have to do another podcast. So this is a podcast to tell you about the podcast that's coming. And in this podcast, I'd be very calm and very rational. And in the next podcast, you need to get yourself sitting down or, out walking or running in somewhere very special with your headphones on and really get yourself into a gear where you can absorb it. Because I think for me, it's a special moment. The February moment is St. Bridget's Day, Cross-Quarter Day, Transition Day, and you go from the darkness of winter, you go from all that sort of residue of the way that you feel about faith on the inside, the way you live on the inside, all through the winter. And then you have this transition moment where it all goes away and you have no faith at all. And you're an existential person, on the surface of the earth. And your life is just a surface. And it's just like, here I am, I'm just an accident, there's no meaning to it. And I really want to dig into that idea. And I want to share with you my experience of that idea, my experience of that journey. When my faith collapses and there's nothing left. I feel I'm on the surface. I'm a bundle of existential anxiety. This is life, this is it, there's no meaning. And I want to share that kind of experience with you. So I'll do it in the next podcast. Because I've already got it done, and I was very happy with it, and I was so happy with it. I says, what I'll do is I'll do another podcast kind of as an introduction to it. And also because one of the things I wanted to do on this podcast, which I couldn't do when I had the big one done, I wanted to share one or two of the letters, the beautiful letters that I got from you. And thank you. Thank you to everybody who sent in letters, and there was quite a few of them. And I'm not going to read them all, but over a period of a few podcasts I will refer to them and read excerpts and read pieces. Today I'll read you, I'm not giving any names, but this person sent me this as a letter to me. And she's describing the nightmares. The nightmares, she writes, started in September 2020. They were not frequent, not very frequent, but they were enough to disturb my sleeping partner, increasingly as time went on. He said I needed to go to the doctor. I said no. I said my mother had nightmares and it obviously ran in the family. But eventually I gave up and I went to see my GP in November. She said it sounded like night terrors and printed out pages of symptoms to look out for. I found it a bit alarming, and I threw the pages away. My partner and I fell out at this stage. And as he said, I wasn't taking it seriously. And I should get a second opinion because perhaps I should have an MRI. I scoffed at this and got on with the course that I was undertaking. I was aware that I was quite tired, but I thought it was the study. Christmas came and went, and my course was becoming more demanding. I was working hard to keep up with it. By the end of January, I was feeling quite run down. On a stormy Saturday afternoon, I went out for a brief jog to liven myself up. I came back to resume my studies, but I was quite damp from the rain and went to change my clothes. 40 minutes later I awoke on the floor, something that had never happened before, as I considered myself to be of robust health. I was aware of feeling a bit addled and decided to go out again for a walk to clear my head so I could work more efficiently. But my head didn't really clear. I was also aware that my eye was discolouring and my nose was swelling from the bump on the floor. I was to go to my partner's for dinner and knew I also had a presentation to have ready for 4 days later, which I did not want to have to cancel. I tried to study, but in vain. Later, I put concealer around my darkening eye and nose and drove the 5 minutes to my partner's house. He was happily cooking dinner in the kitchen. I felt a little uneasy. He asked me if I was okay, and I didn't really answer. I replied by asking him to turn off the cooker and come and have a look at me. He was puzzled as to why I was asking him this. I took off the reading glasses I was wearing as a cover, and he said, "You're wearing makeup. I don't usually, and certainly not during pandemic times." I told him what had happened earlier in the afternoon and watched his face darken. He said to take the makeup off and he could have a better look. His response was one of alarm. I said I had to give a presentation 4 days later and would return to my GP afterwards. He said firmly, "No, this needs to be sorted now." COVID was at its pre-vaccination height, and I was afraid of ending up in A&E, so I rang the out-of-hours doctor, but didn't get a satisfactory reply. On Monday, I rang my GP, and in spite of the pandemic, was given an appointment within an hour. My partner came also. The doctor said she thought my blood pressure had fallen suddenly and jogging resulting in my passing out, but she'd get a brain MRI appointment for the following week. Meanwhile, I got on with my studies and the presentation. 2 weeks after the GP appointment and the subsequent MRI, I got an early morning phone call from my doctor, unprecedented. She said something had shown up in the scan. It was called a meningioma, a growth on my brain. She went on to say that it was usually benign, didn't seem to be very big, but would need to be removed at some stage by a neurosurgeon in Beaumont. She also said a neurologist would see me the following week. I immediately called my boyfriend and asked him to come down. He was very shocked and said, "So much for nightmares and passing out. You were having seizures." This scared the hell out of me. Later that afternoon, my GP left a voicemail saying I wasn't allowed to drive until a year after surgery, and all this was sorted out. Definitely not good news. The following week, the neurologist looked at the MRI, did some reflex tests, and concluded that things weren't as bad as initially thought. He felt I could continue my course and perhaps have surgery at the end of 3 months. He did refer me for some further tests the following week. Not long afterwards I had to defer on the study and things because a bit of a blur as I waited on the neurosurgeon's consultation. I was fine on a day-to-day basis, but I did get very tired. My appointment with the surgeon came through for the 1st of March, and he requested in advance a second MRI, this time with dye. I had this done, and we took it along to his office. He seemed quite grave. The growth was bigger than earlier anticipated by the neurologist, possibly slowly growing for a number of years, and would have come out sooner rather than later, as the neurologist had thought. This was a bit of a blow, and difficult to take in. I was going to have major surgery during COVID times, and wouldn't be allowed to have visitors for the duration. The consultants were astonished that aside from fatigue and a very occasional headache, I hadn't been having any other symptoms, apart from recent nightmares, something I put down to my daily jogging, or swimming, or Pilates. The days went by slowly while I waited to be called, and tried not to think about it. I sorted my study notes and books and packed them away. Then, after a busy day when I forgot to take my newly prescribed medicine, I had another seizure in the evening. I informed my GP in the morning, and she said a bed in Beaumont would be available the following week. For someone who's not in hospital for nearly 40 years, it was difficult to know what to bring, and I was quite daunted by the whole thing, as I knew I would have no visitors for a week at least. But my boyfriend got me there with books and pyjamas, socks and water, which I heard was risky in hospital at this time, and left me at the entrance reception on a Tuesday evening. Now I was on my own, apart from the COVID receptionist, and then I had to take the lift upstairs to wait for a bed to become free in the ward. Single rooms, I was told, were only for those who were very poorly. Next morning, St. Patrick's Day, I was dressed for surgery, the only green being the nylon hospital socks, and I had no food or drink sign placed on my table. Several hours later a nurse came and told me that I wouldn't be going to surgery after all, but it would be the following day. Lunch had passed, so I ate 4 slices of toast to pull me out of my near-starvation state. Then I changed back into my pyjamas, but I kept the green socks on in honour of St. Patrick. Later my surgeon stopped by for a brief conversation and confirmed that I would have surgery the following day. He was quite blunt and told me I could have a stroke or I could die during the operation. He had told me this in his office 3 weeks beforehand, but I hadn't taken it in. I took it in this time. On the 18th, I was again dressed for surgery, and the no food and drink sign went up. I was taken down to theatre at lunchtime, where quite a few other whey-faced silent people were lined up on trolleys for the same fate with different surgeons. I'd been told I'd be in for 3.5 to 4 hours. The last thing I remember was looking up at several faces and having my hand scratched, and later, in the dark, I was awoken in the high dependency unit where people first go after surgery. Nurses woke me regularly during the night to ask me standard factual questions, to see if I could answer. I could. But when morning came, I realized I couldn't speak independently, as in I was unable to generate a conversation or say anything creative. I was scared, as I knew this was governed by the area of the brain where I'd had surgery. Aside from that, I was very groggy and kept falling back to sleep. I couldn't see myself, but I knew my head was very swollen, as my glasses wouldn't fit on. On day 2 after surgery, I was moved back to the 6-bed ward to which I'd been admitted, and was glad to see some familiar faces, although, unlike prior to surgery, I couldn't converse with them. My partner rang me a number of times, but I knew all I could say was yes and no, and this was very distressing for both of us. I was, however, reading the books I'd brought with me, and figured that if I could understand the text, my speech would return, which it started to do on day 3. Meanwhile, my reading glasses started to fit me properly again without having to be held on. Other people who'd had surgery days before me were being discharged, so I was wondering if I'd be next. My partner wanted to be assured that there was no further risk of seizures after my discharge, so I was being closely monitored, and a week after admission I was released from the care of the kindly nurses and medical staff with 30 staples across my head, but otherwise the hair I'd feared I'd lose was intact. The female Polish porter took me and the wheelchair. It had my bag with books in, down to the reception area, where I'd arrived a week before, and my partner was there awaiting me with a huge bouquet of roses. For the first time since surgery, I wept with joy and relief. I had survived the ordeal, weakened but not broken. Subsequent tests results show afterwards that the growth or tumour was benign, which was a huge reassurance. I did, however, have to have 6 weeks of daily radiotherapy over the summer of COVID, to sterilise the area, and that was when I lost half my hair, but it's growing back. And in the autumn, I was given the all clear. 1 year on to the week from January 21, I can see it's all been a miracle. And moreover, I'm able to talk again. And that was the extraordinary letter that I got. It's my favourite, I think. And I think it's my favourite because it's so detailed, so eloquent, and so enormous a story, and the 3 things go together. Eloquence and detail is the way to tell your story. If you can just get the details right, say it as it happened, get each little precise detail, and recount what happened, what you experienced. It's astonishing how it makes an amazingly big and powerful story. And to me, it's a powerful story because, believe it or not, that lady was in Beaumont at the same time as I was in Beaumont, as far as I know. I don't know. You're out there, I should speak directly to you. Author of this letter, thank you for this letter. It's a beautiful letter. It's a wonderful letter. It's a classic example of the art of memoir. It's a classic example. The art of memoir, being able to shape the story eloquently with the details of what happened, recording exactly what happened, without emotion, without colour, without opinions, just fact by fact, keep the story going, and then there's a core comes out. For me it was huge because I was there when you were there, and it's very, very similar to my experience. I didn't have the same operation, but the fear the intensity of being in hospital, it's a very formidable thing. And they do an amazing amount of good work, the people who work in Beaumont. So this was something that I really wanted to share, a letter that I got from somebody about their illness. A letter that gives you a very, very good example of what good writing in memoir is all about. The art of memoir. To tell the story without interfering with it, without putting in your opinions, just recount almost forensically what happened. What happened. That makes a fascinating story. And so, this podcast is for Friday evening, and I hope you're going to have a great weekend. But I want to tell you that there's a very, very special podcast coming in about an hour's time, Friday evening or Saturday morning, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for being here, and bye-bye.